I worked the graveyard shift at the warehouse for 31 years, and my knees never let me forget it. Every morning I'd come home, sit at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, and feel the ache settle into my joints like bad weather moving in. I didn't mind. A man works, that's what a man does. My father worked until he couldn't stand, and his father before him. It's just the way things were in our family. My daughter passed away 2 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Stage 4 by the time they found it. She was 41 years old, and she left behind a husband named Walt and a little girl named Penny, who was 7 at the time. Penny had my daughter's eyes, that same pale green, almost gray in certain light, the kind of eyes that look like they're always thinking about something. After the funeral, after everyone went home and the casserole dishes were returned and the sympathy cards stopped coming, I sat down with Walt and we had a real conversation. He was a decent man, quiet, worked in logistics at a mid-sized freight company out of Columbus. He wasn't flashy or loud. My daughter had loved him for exactly that reason. She said once, sitting at my kitchen table drinking iced tea, that she loved how still Walt was, that the world felt calmer around him. I thought about that a lot after she was gone. Walt had some debt, medical bills mostly. My daughter's treatments had been aggressive and expensive, even with insurance, and the co-pays and out-of-pocket costs had buried them. He had credit card debt from the lean months when he'd taken unpaid leave to be with her toward the end. I'd help where I could during that time, but I was on a fixed income. Social Security, a small pension from the union. Not a lot, but steady. I told Walt I wanted to help, not because I felt obligated, but because Penny was my granddaughter and I was not going to watch that little girl go without while I still had 2 working hands and a Social Security deposit hitting my account on the 3rd of every month. We agreed on $500 a month. I'd send it on the 1st, like clockwork. Walt said it would help cover Penny's after-school program, groceries, her dance lessons. My daughter had loved dance as a girl. I liked knowing that piece of her was still alive in Penny's Tuesday afternoons. I never missed a payment, not once in 2 years. I should back up and say something about myself, because context matters here. I'm 67. I live alone in a small house in Dayton, Ohio that I've owned outright since 2009. I drive a 2014 Ford F-150 that I maintain myself. I eat simply. I don't drink much anymore. I don't travel. I have a vegetable garden in the backyard that my wife used to tend before she passed. That was 8 years ago now. A heart attack, quick and merciless. And I keep it going because it feels like keeping something of hers alive. I grow tomatoes and green beans and enough zucchini to feed the entire block whether they want it or not. The point is, I know where my money goes. I'm careful with it the way men who've worked physical jobs their whole lives tend to be careful. Every dollar has a weight to it when you've earned it with your body. So when my neighbor Frank, he lives 2 houses down, retired postal worker. We've been friends since our kids were in elementary school together. When Frank said something to me on a Thursday morning in October, I paid attention. I was pulling weeds along my fence line. Frank came walking his dog, that old basset hound he calls Senator, and he stopped at the edge of my yard the way he sometimes does when he has something on his mind but isn't sure how to say it. Frank is not a man who wastes words, so when he went quiet for a moment, I stood up. He said, "I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to take it wrong." I said, "Just say it, Frank." He told me he'd been in Columbus last weekend, visiting his sister who lives out there. He'd stopped at a shopping center to pick up something, a strip mall off Route 1961, and he'd seen Walt. He was sure it was Walt because he'd met him at my daughter's funeral and a couple of times since. Walt was coming out of a restaurant with a woman Frank didn't recognize. They were laughing. She had her arm through his. Frank said they were clearly together, not in the way of 2 co-workers grabbing lunch. Together. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just looked at Senator sniffing at my fence post. I told Frank that people move on. 2 years was not a short time. Walt was still young, 44 years old. It wasn't wrong for him to have someone. Frank nodded slowly. He said that wasn't really what concerned him. He said the woman was carrying shopping bags from stores he recognized, not cheap places, and Walt had been dressed differently than the Walt he remembered. New clothes, nice ones. He mentioned seeing Walt get into a car he didn't recognize, something newer and larger than what Walt used to drive. Frank didn't say anything after that. He just looked at me with the expression a man gets when he's told you the thing he needed to tell you and he's going to let you sit with it. I thought about it for 3 days before I did anything. I want to be clear about something. I did not want to believe anything bad about Walt. I genuinely liked him. He had been a good husband to my daughter, and from everything I could see, he was a decent father to Penny. And I understood that grief looks different on different people. That a widower with a 7-year-old finding companionship after 2 years was not a moral failing. But Frank's face that morning stayed with me, and the things he described, the clothes, the car, the shopping bags, those details had a specific texture that I recognized. They were details about money. I called Walt the following Monday, kept it casual. Asked how he was, asked about Penny, how school was going, whether she was still in dance. Walt sounded fine, relaxed, normal. I mentioned offhand that I hoped the money was still helping with the basics, the groceries and the after-school program the way we'd talked about. He said, yes, absolutely. It made a real difference. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The after-school program at Penny's school. I never actually confirmed it existed. I'd assumed. The dance lessons. I'd never asked for a studio name, a schedule, anything. I had been sending $500 a month on the first of every month for 24 months, and I had taken exactly 0 steps to verify where any of it was going because I had trusted Walt the way you trust family. I'm a stubborn man, and I'll admit that. I needed to see something before I would let myself believe something I didn't want to believe. My daughter had set up a home security camera system about 6 months before she died. She was sick and tired and anxious about all the things she wouldn't be there for, and she'd wanted Walt to have a record if anything ever happened with Penny. Anything at school, anything with strangers. It was a simple system. 2 cameras outside, 1 at the front door, 1 at the back, connected to a cloud account. She had given me the login information during a long conversation we had toward the end, when she was still herself enough to make plans. She said, "Dad, I need you to know this, in case." I'd never used it. It felt like an intrusion. Walt was handling things. After the call, I pulled up the app on my tablet for the first time. The cameras were still active. The account had been paid up through the end of the year on automatic renewal. I felt something uncomfortable in my chest doing it, some mix of guilt and dread, but I did it anyway. I spent the better part of an evening going through footage. On the days I sent money, the first of every month I watched. The footage doesn't store forever, but I had about 60 days of it. I looked at the 1st of October, then September. I watched people come and go from the house. I saw Penny leaving for school in the mornings, her little backpack bouncing, and that alone nearly made me close the app. But I kept looking. On October 1st, the day after I'd sent the transfer, I watched a woman arrive at the house at 11 in the morning. She was there for 4 hours. She left carrying 2 large reusable bags, not groceries. The bags were from a home goods store, the large flat kind that hold decor, picture frames, things like that. She and Walt stood in the doorway for a while before she left. They kissed. On September 1st, a different scene. Walt left the house around noon. He came back 2 hours later. He was carrying a small shopping bag himself, the kind from a men's clothing store. He was on his phone laughing. Penny was at school in both instances. I closed the app, and I sat in the kitchen for a long time without moving. The $500 a month was not going to Penny's after-school program. Or some of it was, Some of it clearly was not. I had been sending money to support my granddaughter, and I was looking at footage of a man whose wardrobe was improving and who had a girlfriend who apparently redecorated his living room on my schedule. I want to say something here, and I want to say it carefully. I was not angry at Walt for having a girlfriend. I was angry at Walt for lying to me. There's a difference. My daughter trusted that man. She loved him. She told me once, near the end, that the thing she was most afraid of wasn't dying, it was Penny, growing up without someone to take care of her. She had asked me, not in so many words, but she had asked, to watch out for them, and I had taken that responsibility, and I had shown up every single month, $500 on the first, steady as the season changing. And while I was doing that, Walt was what? Using my grief and my love for my granddaughter as supplemental income for a life I hadn't been told about? That was what it felt like. That was the specific shape of the betrayal. I called my younger brother the next morning. His name is Cecil. He's retired from the fire department up in Cleveland, and he is the most pragmatic man I have ever known. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is a skill not many people have. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "What do you want to do about it?" I said I wanted to know the truth before I did anything else. Cecil said, "Then find out the truth." I started paying closer attention. I called Walt again that week, said I was coming down to Columbus to take Penny to lunch as she was free on Saturday. Her birthday was coming up, and I wanted to take her to that pizza place she loved. Walt said, "Sure, of course," and I drove down. Penny came running out the door when she saw my truck, same as she always did, and that put a lump in my throat that I swallowed down. She was 9 now and still had her mother's eyes, and she showed me a drawing she'd made at school that week, like it was the most important thing in the world. I took it, and I told her it was beautiful, and I meant it completely. Over pizza, I asked Penny a few careful questions. Nothing leading, nothing that would confuse her or worry her. I asked if she liked her after-school program. She looked at me with a slightly puzzled expression and said she didn't go to after school anymore, that she went to her friend Olivia's house instead on the days Daddy worked late. I asked about dance. She said she'd stopped taking lessons because they switched studios and the new one was far away. I smiled and changed the subject to whether she wanted more garlic bread. On the drive home, I sat with that information for the full 2 hours. There was no after-school program. There were no dance lessons. There was just Walt, living a little better than he'd been living, and a grandmother's heart being used as a budget line. I called Cecil again that night. He worked in Cleveland for 30 years. He knew people, and he had the kind of no-nonsense approach to situations like this that I needed. He said what I needed first was to document everything, and second was to stop the money. Not dramatically, not in a way that telegraphed anything, but stop it while I figured out my next step. He also said if I wanted to know where the money was actually going, there were legal ways to find out. The 1st of November came, and I did not send the transfer. Walt called on the 3rd. He was pleasant about it at first, asked if everything was okay, said he just noticed the transfer hadn't come through. I said I'd had some unexpected expenses come up that month, and I was sorry. I'd try to get it to him soon. He said, "No problem. Take your time." I heard in his voice something that was trying very hard to sound unbothered. I'd spent 31 years on a warehouse floor reading the body language of men under pressure. Even over the phone, I could hear the effort. I didn't send it in November or December. Walt called twice in December. Both times I gave him variations of the same story. Expenses, the holidays, trying to get things straightened out. He was less pleasant the second time. Not rude, but there was an edge to it. He mentioned that things had gotten tight, that Penny's needs were, and I almost said something then. I had to clamp down hard on what I wanted to say. After New Year's, my brother drove down from Cleveland, and we sat at my kitchen table and worked through what I knew. Cecil had talked to a friend of his who was a retired attorney, not practicing but knowledgeable, and the friend had said a few things worth knowing. What Walt had done, representing that money was going toward the child's specific needs when it was not, could constitute misrepresentation. Not necessarily a crime in every circumstance, but it had implications. More practically, if I could document the conversation where Walt described the money as going toward Penny's care and then document that it wasn't, I had leverage. I also had something else. I had 2 years of bank transfers, 24 payments, $12,000. I wrote Walt a letter. I want to say that clearly. Not a text, not an email, a letter. Because a letter means you had time to think about what you were saying, and it also creates a record. Cecil looked it over before I sent it. The letter was not emotional. It was factual. I stated what I had sent over the past 2 years and why, as understood from our conversations. I stated what I had learned from my granddaughter during our lunch about the after-school program and the dance lessons no longer existing. I stated what I had observed on the security camera footage. I did not threaten anything. I asked for an accountant of where the money had gone, and I stated plainly that I expected a conversation. Walt called me the day he received it. He did not start out apologetic. He started out defensive, which told me everything I needed to know about his conscience. He said I had no right to access those cameras, that the account was in the house he lived in, that I had been spying on his family. He said the money was a gift, not a contract, and that I had no claim over how he used a gift. I let him go. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I said, "Walt, I'm 67 years old, and I'm not a naive man. What you just said to me tells me you know exactly what you did. The only question now is what we do about it." The silence that followed lasted long enough that I checked the phone to make sure the call was still connected. His voice was different when he spoke again, smaller. He said things had been harder than he'd let on. He said the debt was still significant, and the money had helped him stay afloat in ways that went beyond just the specific things he'd told me. He said he hadn't meant for it to become what it became. I said I understood that debt was hard, and grief was hard, and raising a child alone was hard. I said I'd lived a hard life, and I understood those things in my bones. I said none of that was the point. The point was that I had given money for my granddaughter, and I had a right to know it was actually reaching my granddaughter. I told him what I wanted. I didn't ask for the money back. I was realistic about what was recoverable and what wasn't, and I was also not willing to create a situation that destabilized Penny's household further. But I told him that going forward, any financial support I provided was going to be direct. Dance lessons, I would pay the studio directly. After-school program, I would pay the school directly. Birthday presents, I would buy them myself. Groceries, I would come down and fill the refrigerator myself. And I told him one other thing. I told him that my daughter had trusted him with Penny's life, and I was going to hold him to that trust whether he liked it or not. I told him I had the camera login, and I intended to keep it. I told him he was free to remove the cameras if he chose, but if he did, I would take that as a signal about what kind of father he intended to be, and I would act accordingly. I said that as clearly and as calmly as I could. He didn't remove the cameras. That was 5 months ago now. I still go down to Columbus once a month, sometimes twice. I take Penny to her dance lessons. She's back in the now. Different studio. Closer to the house. I wait in the lobby with the other grandparents and the moms checking their phones. And I watch her through the glass in the door. And she is the image of her mother at that age. Small and concentrated and entirely herself. Walt and I have arrived at something that I would not call warm, but I would call honest. He knows I'm paying attention. I know he knows. That's enough. The pretense is gone. And in my experience, the absence of pretense is the closest thing to a clean foundation you can build on with another person. Frank asked me a few months ago how things had ended up. We were out front. He was walking Senator. I was getting the mail. I gave him the short version. He nodded the way he does. Then he said, Good thing you stood up." I told him it was good that he told me, that without him saying something, I'd still be sending those transfers on the 1st of every month and calling it love when it was really just being used. He shrugged and said, "Neighbor thing." I watched him walk Senator down the block, that old dog waddling along, and I thought about my daughter and the pale green of her eyes and the fact that somewhere across the city of Columbus, her little girl with those same eyes was going to dance class on Tuesday afternoons, paid for by her grandfather, going directly to where it was supposed to go. That's what I came back to at the end of all of it. Not the money, not Walt, not even the betrayal, as real as it was. I came back to Penny in that studio, her feet finding the rhythm, her face doing the thing my daughter's face used to do, that look of being completely present inside something that she loved. Some things you do for yourself. Some things you do because you gave your word to someone who can't hold you to it anymore, and the only thing that keeps you honest is the fact that you still have to live inside your own skin. I drive home from Columbus on those Tuesday evenings with the windows down even in the cold, because my wife always said fresh air was better than any medicine, and I have found no evidence to the contrary. I'm 67 years old. My knees still ache every morning. I still grow too much zucchini. And every Tuesday, my granddaughter dances. I keep thinking about that Tuesday evening drive home from Columbus. Windows down, the cold air coming in off the fields, and me just sitting with everything that had happened over the past few months. Not angry anymore, not even sad in the sharp way I'd been sad. Just thinking. What got me wasn't the money. $12,000 is real and losing it stings, but I've lost things worth more and survived. What got me was how long I'd been willing not to look. How I'd taken the fact that I trusted Walt and turned it into a reason to stop paying attention. Like trust was supposed to do the work that my own eyes should have been doing. That was my part in it. I own that. There's a version of this story where I never stopped the transfers, where Frank walks Senator past my house and keeps his mouth shut because it's not his business, and I go on sending $500 on the 1st of every month until I'm too old to work the side jobs that supplement my pension. That version of the story exists. It almost happened. And in that version, Penny still doesn't go to dance class, and I still feel like I'm doing right by my daughter. And the whole thing just quietly continues until it can't. What I've come to understand is that love without attention isn't really love. It's just sentiment. My daughter didn't ask me to feel something for Penny. She asked me to show up. Those are different things, and I confused them for 2 years because showing up was harder and feeling was easier. Walt made choices. His choices had consequences, not dramatic ones. Not the kind you see in movies, but real ones. He lost the easy version of our relationship. He gained a version where I'm present and watching and not going anywhere. I think some part of him is actually relieved. When a person has been carrying a deception for a while, there's a kind of exhaustion to it that I recognized in his voice the day he finally stopped defending himself. The truth has weight, but so does a lie. You have to maintain every single month. What I want to say to anyone watching this is something I wish someone had said to me when I was younger. Being a good person isn't enough on its own. You also have to be a clear-eyed one. You can have the best intentions in the world, and I genuinely did, and still be used if you're not willing to ask hard questions and look at hard answers. Goodness without discernment is just vulnerability with a nicer name. And then there's the matter of not giving up. I'm 67. I could have swallowed the loss, told myself it was done, and stopped going to Columbus. A lot of men my age would have. But Penny is 9 years old, and she has her mother's eyes, and she deserves someone who doesn't quit when things get uncomfortable. So I didn't quit. I wrote the letter. I had the conversation. I rebuilt something on an honest foundation, even when it would have been easier to walk away from the whole mess. That's the only thing I know for certain at this point in my life. You don't get to choose what happens to you. You only get to choose whether you're paying attention when it does, whether you're honest enough to name it, and whether you've got enough left in you to keep showing up anyway. Penny dances on Tuesdays. I'm there every week. That's enough.